Her hand was trembling as she pointed the taser. My son was screaming, not for himself, but for his dog. His service dog. The only thing that kept his seizures from killing him. And Karen, HOA president, part-time tyrant, full-time lunatic, pulled the trigger anyway. Sparks flew. The dog collapsed. And the worst part? She smiled. She said dangerous animals aren't allowed on HOA property. But what kind of animal does that to a disabled boy's only lifeline? My son's dog is not just a dog. She's a lifesaver. Her name is Liberty, a golden retriever with eyes soft as rain clouds and instincts sharper than any machine. She was trained to detect the onset of seizures, specifically the rare, silent type that can drop my son, Evan, with no warning. She alerts us by pawing him gently or pressing a soft bark if no one is nearby. She's certified, federally protected, and cost me more than most people's cars. But I would have mortgaged the house twice over if it meant Evan could live without fear of collapsing onto cold pavement or choking in his sleep. We moved into this neighborhood, Halcyon Hills, because it was advertised as quiet, secure, family-oriented. I needed somewhere peaceful to recover after 20 years in federal litigation. Evan needed stability, and Liberty needed space to work. The house was perfect. Big yard, gentle sidewalks, a small community park a block away. Evan loved riding his three-wheeled adaptive scooter while Liberty trotted beside him, her leash hooked to the side. They were a team, a unit. And for the first few weeks, things were calm. Too calm, I should have realized. The calm before the storm has a smell, a stillness. And that stillness was named Karen Meyer. I first noticed her standing at the end of her driveway watering a plant that had long since died. Her stare was sharp, like she was memorizing the cadence of Evan's wheels on the sidewalk. I gave her a polite wave the first day. She didn't wave back. Instead, she watched Liberty as if the golden retriever were some kind of jungle predator. A few days later, I found a note on our door. Printed, not handwritten. Not signed. All pets must be leashed in common areas. See HOA Section 12A. Liberty had been leashed, of course. Always was. I didn't even respond. But then the notes started stacking up. Animals over 40 pounds are considered restricted breeds. Dog droppings found near community rosebeds. Noise complaint filed against dog barking during quiet hours. Evan doesn't speak much. But that dog does. Liberty's bark is soft, trained, used only for medical alerts. But Karen didn't care. She found the code and twisted it to suit her paranoia. The problem wasn't noise or weight or leashes. The problem was Liberty existed at all. One morning I caught her snapping a photo from behind a hedge while Evan and Liberty were playing fetch in the yard. When I stepped out, she ducked back and acted like she was just inspecting a daffodil. I confronted her gently, asked if there was an issue. Her smile was the kind that split skin from condescension. No issue, she said. Just making sure everything is compliant. I didn't like the way she said compliant. Like it was a threat wrapped in plastic HOA jargon. I went inside and pulled out Liberty's documentation, ADA certification, Federal Medical Service, animal registration, vet records, trainer's dossier. I made copies and mailed one to the HOA office. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Weeks passed. More letters. Now they were notices. Official HOA stationery signed by Karen Meyer, HOA president. She had weaponized her position and turned compliance into a cudgel. The letters escalated. Violation notice, animal not properly identified. Warning, aggressive behavior by unleashed dog. Aggressive? Liberty had the temperament of a stuffed animal. Evan began asking if they did something wrong. I tried to shield him, but he could feel it. Kids know when the air in their world changes. The whispers began too. Neighbors stopping their walks short when Liberty came near. Parents pulling their children away at the park. Someone scrawled "No dogs in park" on the bulletin board, crudely in permanent marker. Karen had lit the fire and her cowardly followers fanned the flames. One morning, Evan came inside crying. Not screaming, not tantruming, just quietly crying, which was worse. I sat him down, heart in my throat. He told me that Mrs. Karen had said Liberty scared her. That if he brought her to the park again, she would call the police to put her down. Put her down. Those were the words she used to a child. I remember going cold. My hands clenched so hard I split a coffee mug without realizing it. I didn't yell. I didn't march over. Not yet. I just logged every word in a folder I kept labeled Containment Protocol, Karen. That week, I formally contacted the HOA and reminded them of federal law. The Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II and III. Liberty was a medical necessity, not a pet. Their enforcement of pet ordinances did not and could not override ADA protections. I attached the relevant case law, including the Department of Justice's own memoranda. I thought the HOA would come to its senses. Instead, Karen doubled down. She hosted a community safety meeting at the clubhouse. Evan wasn't invited, of course. But I attended. She had a slideshow. Yes, a slideshow. Dog attack statistics, pictures of pit bulls, barking Rottweilers, injury charts, all fear-mongering nonsense. Then she clicked to a grainy photo of Liberty, Mignon, and said, even trained animals can snap. A few neighbors nodded. Most just looked confused. I stood up halfway through and stated for the record that Liberty was a federally protected medical alert animal. Karen tried to shout over me, but the room had already shifted. I left. The next day, I got a letter. Not an email. A printed letter delivered by hand. As a result of recent safety concerns, the HOA will be proposing a new bylaw amendment, Section 13C, prohibition of canines over 30 pounds in community green spaces, with exceptions only for emotional support animals verified by HOA board. It was surgical. Not service animals, but emotional support, a lesser legal classification, intentionally wrong. They were trying to backdoor Liberty off public land. I called a friend of mine, Elena, an ADA compliance attorney in D.C., and she confirmed my suspicion. It was unenforceable, discriminatory, and likely illegal. But Karen was playing a different game. She wasn't trying to win in court. She was trying to make life unbearable so we'd leave. I tried to keep Evan's routine normal. Liberty too. We walked early when the sidewalks were empty. Avoided the park. Took back roads to the store. But Karen always found a way. A sudden HOA inspection where Liberty's presence was noted as unregistered. An anonymous call to animal control claiming an unsecured large dog in the neighborhood. Liberty had her ID, her vest, her tags. She was never unsecured. But that didn't stop the officer from knocking on our door, asking questions, reading from a script that Karen probably typed up herself. I invited him in, showed him the documents, let Liberty demonstrate her alert routine. The officer left with an apology. I watched him drive straight to Karen's house. She met him at the driveway. She was smiling. That night, Evan came to my room and asked if Liberty could sleep in his bed. He said he felt weird. That's the word he uses when he senses a seizure. Liberty had already curled up near his feet. I stayed awake all night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of my son's breathing and the slow, steady sighs of a golden retriever trained to keep him alive. I knew Karen wasn't done. But I also knew something she didn't. I wasn't just some dad. I wasn't just some neighbor. I was a federal litigator. I'd fought corporations. I'd brought down fraudsters who thought they were untouchable. And now I had a target far more personal. Karen had crossed a line. And I was done playing nice. The whispers became fangs. What started as Karen's obsessive crusade turned into a full-blown HOA-backed campaign of fear. By the time fall leaves had begun crisping beneath Evan's scooter wheels, Karen had assembled a little army. Not of soldiers, but of smirking, nodding, half-cowardly neighbors who were too spineless to challenge her and too eager to feel like they belonged. They started with the soft pressure, the neighborly smiles that disappeared when we passed. Conversations that fell silent when I stepped outside. Evan noticed too, and he began riding slower. Liberty would nudge his hand when he hesitated. They don't like her, he said one day, eyes focused on his shoelaces. They don't like me. I crouched down beside him and said something I don't even remember, something about how being different isn't wrong, but my own words tasted like ash in my mouth. Because he wasn't wrong. They didn't like him. Because of her. Karen moved to phase 2, false documentation. I received an official-looking envelope with HOA letterhead and 3 documents inside, copies of alleged complaints submitted by residents. The first claimed Liberty had lunged at a toddler. No name listed. No date. No video. Just a scribbled account from concerned parent. The second said Evan was letting Liberty defecate near the basketball court and not cleaning it up. Evan, my son, who carries a bag dispenser clipped to his scooter like a badge of honor, had never once left a mess behind. The third was a doozy. It claimed Liberty had been seen wandering off-leash and chasing neighborhood cats. I laughed out loud when I read it. Liberty couldn't chase a ball without checking Evan's heart rate. She was as likely to sprint as she was to juggle. But these weren't real accusations. These were paper bullets. HOA violations designed not to win in court, but to stack up and justify a final, fatal blow, removal. I could see the coordination now. Karen was working with the board's vice president, an elderly creep named Donald Breyer who'd once told Evan to keep his dog quiet or move to the woods. Breyer lived 3 houses down and never left his porch unless it was to gripe about someone's trash bin placement or to peer at our yard through binoculars. I caught him once pretending to read a newspaper with holes poked through it like some cartoon villain. Then there was Judith from across the street who signed every HOA petition with a heart over her eye but voted to eliminate all non-standard residential activities which somehow included Evan's sidewalk chalk drawings. These people were hollow skins wrapped around fear and petty tyranny. They didn't hate Liberty. They hated that we didn't obey. One day Evan and Liberty came home early from their walk, both shaking. I knelt beside them and Evan wouldn't speak at first. Then he whispered, "A man followed us." Liberty was on high alert, tail rigid, nose twitching. I checked the cameras. Sure enough, a gray sedan had been idling 2 blocks behind them the whole time, crawling at a snail's pace. When they turned down our street, it drove on, but I recognized the plate. It was HOA board treasurer Alan Michaels. Alan had once bragged at a meeting that he had installed surveillance-grade motion cameras around his house to protect the community. I printed a screenshot of the footage and slipped it into my file, along with a note, "Surveillance of minor. Potential stalking." Karen had turned this into a cult. And like all cult leaders, she hid behind structure. Meetings. Quorums. Votes. I decided to attend the next board meeting not as a father but as a federal attorney. I wore my DC suit not out of vanity but out of precision. There's something surgical about walking into a hostile room wearing a tailored navy blade. The clubhouse was packed, likely because Karen had encouraged attendance through the HOA newsletter, which conveniently featured a front-page safety update with a blurred image of Liberty and the headline, "What makes a dog dangerous?" I scanned the room, locked eyes with Karen. She smiled like a snake pretending to sunbathe. Tonight's discussion, she announced, is about community harmony. Specifically, how unregulated animal presence may affect our shared spaces. I let her run the script. I didn't interrupt as Donald Breyer droned on about leash lengths. I didn't flinch when Judith brought out a chart she clearly didn't understand showing national pet-related injury trends. And then came the proposal, an amendment to the bylaws that would prohibit any animal exceeding 30 pounds from accessing the park, walking trails, or sidewalks during high-traffic hours defined vaguely as before 10 a.m. and after 3 p.m. I raised my hand. Karen's face twitched. "Yes," she said sweetly. I stood, introduced myself, then pulled out Liberty's ADA credentials, then pulled out my badge. Not a police badge. My court badge. I laid it flat on the table and watched a hush fall like ash over the room. "I'm a federal lawyer," I began. "And your proposed bylaw violates federal law. Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination by private entities operating places of public accommodation. This includes parks, sidewalks, and common-use facilities in residential neighborhoods. Any rule that would bar a trained, documented service dog from accessing those areas is not only unenforceable, it's illegal. Moreover, targeting a child with a disability by exclusionary ordinance is a violation of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act." I let the silence breathe. Let them stew in the words federal violation. Then I delivered the dagger. Any further attempts to isolate, restrict, or harass my son or his service animal will be construed as systemic discrimination and subject to injunctive relief. I paused. That's legal speak for, "I will sue this board into the next century." Karen tried to recover. She stood, clicked her tongue, and said, "We're just trying to be proactive. Surely you understand that in a community like ours," I cut her off. "No, I understand precisely. You think because you sit on a little suburban throne, you can bypass federal protection law and bully a 10-year-old with medical needs. And I'm here to make sure you understand the cost of that mistake." I left them sitting in stunned silence. By the time I got home, there was already a message in the HOA portal saying the proposed bylaw was being postponed for further legal review. But I knew Karen wouldn't let it end there. I knew the kind of person she was. The next blow came days later. A neighbor, single mom, 3 kids, decent person, stopped me outside and said, "Hey, just a heads up. Karen's been going door to door asking people to sign something about Liberty. A petition to classify non-certified animals as threats to the community." I asked how many signatures she had. The woman shrugged. "Not many, but she's lying about what the petition's for. Telling people you moved in under false pretenses. That Liberty isn't a real service dog. That you forged her credentials." My jaw locked. Karen wasn't trying to win through rules. She was trying to paint us as frauds. That night, I went outside to breathe. Liberty sat beside me, watching the trees sway. Evan was asleep, clutching the dog's tail in his fist. I looked up at the stars and realized something cold and clear. Karen was going to keep escalating until something broke. And I couldn't let it be us. I needed to let her walk into the fire. I just had to set the stage. So I started documenting everything. Every note, every whisper, every flyer. I recorded the HOA meetings, photographed her going door to door. I even wired a security camera on Liberty's harness disguised in her collar. Not because I was paranoid, but because people like Karen don't believe they're being watched until the cuffs click. And still, it wasn't enough. Karen needed one final act to push the knife in. One more performance. And it was coming sooner than I expected. Because the very next morning, while I was inside reviewing case files, Evan asked if he could take Liberty on a short walk to the park. I looked at the time, 8:45 a.m., early enough that most people wouldn't be out. Stick to the sidewalk. 15 minutes, I told him. If she alerts, come home immediately. He nodded. Liberty gave a soft bark and nuzzled his hand. I watched them walk down the block together, my chest tight with love and anxiety. I should have followed. I should have gone with them. But I didn't. And that's when Karen struck. I heard the scream before I saw the message. Evan's voice, high-pitched and broken, pierced through the morning calm like glass shattering under pressure. I was halfway through redlining a deposition when it rang out, a sound no parent should ever hear. I dropped my pen and ran. Down the steps, out the door, sprinting faster than I had in 20 years. I didn't think. I didn't call. I just ran toward the sound of my son breaking apart. When I rounded the corner of the community park, what I saw stopped me cold. Karen was standing 10 feet from Evan, one hand gripping her HOA clipboard, the other still raised, fist clenched around a black plastic device. A taser. Liberty was on the ground, twitching, whimpering, her limbs spasming in that unnatural, jerky rhythm I've only seen in emergency rooms. Evan was on his knees, sobbing, his hands shaking as he reached out but didn't know what to do. I didn't shout. I didn't speak. I walked forward with the stillness of someone who has seen this kind of trauma before, just never this close to home. What the hell did you do? I asked, voice low, graveled. Karen turned to face me, and to my disgust, she looked proud. That dog attacked me, she said, cool and clipped. I acted in self-defense. She growled. Lungs coiled. She was about to lunge. I stepped between her and my son, dropping to my knees beside Liberty. Her body was still trembling. Her vest, bright red and clearly marked service animal, medical alert, was scorched along one seam. The prongs of the taser had pierced just under the harness strap. I could smell the burning fur. Evan was still shaking, his face streaked with tears. She was trying to stop my seizure, he whispered. She barked. She was trying to tell me. His words broke off. I could see it now, he'd been about to collapse. Liberty had barked once, maybe twice, a warning. Karen, ever the suburban executioner, had assumed aggression and struck. I looked up. A small group of neighbors stood at the edge of the park, frozen. Some with phones held low, recording but unsure. Others looking away, guilty, ashamed. Karen straightened as if preparing for a speech. I warned you, she said. I've been warning everyone. That dog is unstable. She barked at a child last week. She leaves waste near the flowers. You should be thanking me. I stood slowly. Very slowly. My entire frame coiled with something dark and ancient. You just committed a federal crime, I said, my voice flat. You assaulted a federally protected service animal performing a medical task. You used a weapon on a child's medical device. And you did it in front of a dozen witnesses. Karen scoffed. It's a dog. Don't be dramatic. I stared at her with a look I usually reserve for hostile witnesses caught perjuring themselves. That dog is legally classified as medical equipment, and you just tossed it in front of my disabled son. I didn't wait for her next lie. I dialed 911. And I said the exact words that change everything. This is a federal attorney reporting an ADA violation and felony assault on a service animal. Perpetrator is armed and still on scene. Child is involved. Medical emergency in progress. Those words? They don't get filtered. They don't get tossed in the local dispatcher pile. They get escalated. Within 5 minutes, 2 cruisers pulled into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing. Liberty was still breathing, but shallow. Evan clutched her fur like it would disappear if he let go. I wrapped my arms around them both until EMTs arrived. Karen didn't even try to run. She stood there, still confident, still smug. Officers, she said, as if she were calling room service. This dog has been a threat for months. I have documented complaints. I acted within my rights to protect myself. The older of the 2 officers, a woman with a veteran's eyes and zero patience for suburban power trips, walked right past her and knelt beside Liberty. This dog wearing a medical vest? She asked me. I nodded. Trained medical alert dog. ADA certified. She's registered through federal documentation. She looked over to Evan, who was now whispering to Liberty, trying to get her to respond. The officer turned to her partner and muttered something I didn't catch. He stepped away and radioed it in. Karen, sensing things were slipping, snapped, "I want to press charges for animal aggression." That dog barked at me and bared her teeth. The female officer finally turned to her, expression flat. "Ma'am, you tossed a federally recognized medical alert animal. That's a Class C felony under Title 18, Section 1368 of the United States Code. And you did it in the presence of a child. We're going to need to detain you for questioning." Karen reeled back, stunned for the first time. "Are you serious? You're taking his side?" She pointed at me as if that would absolve her. "He's been harassing me with legal threats for months. I'm the HOA president." The second officer returned. "Ma'am, please place the taser on the ground and step away." She hesitated. And then, for the first time since I'd moved into that cursed neighborhood, I saw her panic. Her eyes darted to the gathering crowd. Phones were out. People were recording. She wasn't winning this one. They cuffed her. Not roughly, but without ceremony. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed quiet. As they read her rights, she sputtered, "This is a mistake. I was defending my community. I know my rights. That dog is a menace." But her words echoed empty across the pavement. The neighbors, those who had whispered, judged, looked away, now watched with something between horror and relief. Karen was being taken away. The tyrant was falling. As she was placed in the back of the cruiser, she caught my eyes one last time. "This isn't over," she hissed. I didn't blink. "You're right. It's just beginning." The EMTs loaded Liberty onto a stretcher, her body wrapped in thermal blankets. One of them, a young tech with kind eyes, whispered, "She's stable. But this is serious. Muscle trauma. Possible cardiac event. You'll need to get a full neurological scan." I've never seen a civilian do that to a service animal. I nodded, barely able to speak. Evan was silent, just holding Liberty's paw, not letting go. I climbed into the ambulance with them. As we drove away, I looked back. Half the neighborhood stood in silence. Some ashamed. Some filming. Some stunned. But none of them stood with Karen. Not anymore. At the hospital, Liberty was stabilized. The taser had hit her along the rib, just under the protective layer of her vest. Without it, she might have gone into full cardiac arrest. They kept her for monitoring. Evan wouldn't leave her side. Not even to eat. "She saved me," he said. "She barked because I was about to fall." The doctors confirmed it. Evan's blood pressure had dropped moments before the incident. Liberty had sensed it. She was alerting. Doing her job. And Karen mistook a medical alert for an attack. That night, I stood outside the hospital under a flickering street lamp and made 3 phone calls. One to my ADA contact in D.C., another to a friend at the Department of Justice, and one to a journalist I'd worked with on a previous whistleblower case. I told them everything. I sent them the footage, the paperwork, the medical notes, the taser report. "You want a story?" I told the journalist. A neighborhood HOA president just tossed a disabled boy's service dog in broad daylight and called it community defense. The next day, the story broke. Not just local. Not just state. National. HOA President Tased's boy's service dog claims community safety. The video went viral. Karen's face, smug, cold, righteous, was splashed across every headline. Parents around the country lit up the internet with outrage. Disability advocates called for immediate charges. News vans parked outside our community gates. The HOA board issued a statement, tepid, vague, full of cowardice. "We regret the recent incident involving a resident and their animal." I wasn't done with them. Not by a long shot. Liberty was released from the hospital after 3 days. She walked with a limp and flinched at loud noises, but the vet said she'd make a full recovery. Evan never left her side. He stopped speaking for a while, not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. I'd seen trauma silence better men. But Liberty stayed by his side, curled up near his feet, tail flicking every time he reached out. She was healing. He was watching. And I was planning. Because Karen wasn't the only guilty one. The HOA board had empowered her. The neighbors had enabled her. And the system had allowed this madness to fester. So I began assembling a case. Not a civil complaint. Not a local action. A federal one. ADA violations. Child endangerment. Aggravated animal cruelty. Abuse of power under color of local authority. I filed FOIA requests. Subpoenaed emails. I had one goal, turn Halcyon Hills into the battleground that would end HOAs like Karen's forever. And by the time I was done, none of them would walk away unscathed. The taser was just the spark. The firestorm was coming. I didn't sleep for 72 hours after Liberty came home. Not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. While Evan clung to his service dog like a lifeline and Liberty whimpered in her sleep with phantom shocks rippling down her spine, I was at the kitchen table transforming rage into legal strategy. The walls were covered in printouts, violation letters, HOA notices, federal statutes, Karen's social media posts, stills from surveillance footage, timestamped witness videos. A war map. Except instead of arrows and troop movements, it was dotted with ADA clause numbers and local ordinance contradictions. I wasn't preparing to sue. I was preparing to dismantle. Karen had no idea what kind of fire she'd started when she squeezed that trigger. She thought she'd be back home in hours. Maybe even file a countersuit for public endangerment. Instead, she was processed, detained, and booked on 3 charges: felony assault on a federally protected service animal, reckless endangerment of a minor, and unlawful use of a weapon in a public space. And while her lawyer, a sharp-chinned local named Reese Thorman, fumbled through local municipal code, I was on the phone with the U.S. Attorney's Office preparing a federal injunction. Karen wasn't just facing county fines anymore. She was facing prison. But the HOA, they were still silent. Hiding behind boilerplate language, playing dumb. A statement on their website read, "The Halcyon Hills HOA Board of Directors regrets the misunderstanding involving 2 residents. We are cooperating fully with local authorities." Misunderstanding? Karen tossed a medical alert dog in front of witnesses while a 10-year-old had a medical episode. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an organized campaign of discrimination that had reached criminal velocity. So I drafted my opening salvo, a formal ADA Title III complaint naming not just Karen but the entire HOA board for ongoing, documented discrimination against a disabled minor through policy, intimidation, and violent proxy action. I listed every instance. Every note, every fabricated complaint, every time the HOA ignored or participated in Liberty's harassment. I filed it with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, ADA Enforcement Branch. I had contacts there. Colleagues. Prosecutors who didn't just believe in the law, they feared what happened when it was broken publicly and brutally. I filed an additional complaint with the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education, citing Section 504 violations for public facilities denying access to a disabled child. Then I CC'd them both in a media tip email to 4 national outlets. By nightfall, CNN, NPR, and 2 investigative podcasts had called me for comment. Karen's face was plastered everywhere. Her mugshot, the one where her smirk had finally melted into shock, circulated online. But this wasn't just about her anymore. I had moved into Phase 2, systemic exposure. I requested minutes from every HOA board meeting over the past 18 months. I issued subpoenas for internal emails, financial allocations, and resident complaint logs. I wasn't just going to burn Karen down, I was going to audit her entire kingdom into oblivion. What I found was even worse than I expected. A hidden HOA chat thread between Karen, Vice President Breyer, Treasurer Michaels, and Secretary Judith. They openly mocked Liberty, called Evan a ticking time bomb. Breyer referred to Liberty as the barking liability. In one message, Karen wrote, "If they won't move out, we'll make the dog unmanageable. Then we can force a vote." Another read, "Get Alan to say the dog lunged at his kid again. Doesn't have to be true, just needs to be on paper." It was a gold mine of institutional cruelty. And it gave me the leverage I needed. I compiled the messages, printed them, and included them as exhibits in my lawsuit. Then I contacted 3 other families who'd left the neighborhood quietly over the past year. One had a child with autism who used a support rabbit. Another had a deaf teenager who used a vibrating alert dog. Both had received incompatible lifestyle notices from the HOA within months of moving in. I connected the dots. Karen's reign wasn't new, it was patterned. Purged the undesirable elements under the guise of community aesthetics. It was eugenics in cul-de-sac clothing. I called a meeting with the HOA's legal counsel, a puffed-up civil defense firm used to handling potholed sidewalks and fence disputes. They came in smug, confident. I came in with a cart full of documents and a federal marshal badge pinned inside my coat pocket, just visible enough to remind them who I used to work for. I laid everything out. We're filing a class action civil suit for ADA violations, emotional distress, child endangerment, and conspiracy to discriminate under federal civil rights statutes. We're not asking for an apology. We're not asking for fees. We're demanding total structural dissolution of the HOA, financial restitution to affected families, and a formal DOJ-supervised audit of all HOA-led disciplinary actions for the past 3 years. The room went silent. Their head counsel cleared his throat and tried to negotiate. Surely we can reach a more modest agreement. Perhaps a settlement with a non-disclosure clause. I leaned forward and whispered, "Tell your client I'm not a man who settles. I prosecute." Meanwhile, Karen posted bail and was seen returning to the neighborhood flanked by local media. Instead of shame, she wore defiance. She walked back to her home like a fallen monarch waiting to be restored. And somehow she convinced herself that the HOA would circle the wagons, that her kingdom was intact, that her cronies still feared her clipboard. But fear had shifted. It had found a new home, one with stacks of federal paperwork and the full weight of civil rights law behind it. As the HOA board scrambled to distance themselves, I launched Phase 3, the community. I hosted a town hall. Not in the HOA clubhouse, but in the local school gym. I invited every resident, every parent, every HOA member. Over 200 people showed up. I stood on that stage with Evan beside me, Liberty resting at his feet with a medical blanket draped across her flank. And then I did what Karen never could. I told the truth. I showed the video. I read the messages. I presented the evidence of systemic targeting. I spoke plainly. This is what happens when power isn't questioned. When fear hides behind rules. When someone uses community as a weapon. My son nearly lost his medical lifeline. And it wasn't an accident. It was policy. Some cried. Some looked away. But many stood. And by the end of the night, the crowd was chanting one word: remove. 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 I drafted a petition to hold an emergency recall vote of the entire HOA board. The bylaws, ironically, gave me everything I needed. 25% signatures to initiate. 51% to finalize. I had 80% in 3 days. Karen tried to run damage control, but her words now fell flat. She stood at the community gates shouting about how I was trying to federalize suburbia. But no one listened. Her emails went unread. Her meetings unattended. And when the official recall was submitted, the board did not resist. They resigned. One by one. Cowards don't stand their ground when justice marches in. But this wasn't the end. This wasn't even revenge yet. That was next. What I'd built so far was pressure. The coming chapter would be execution. Because the federal lawsuit was filed. The DOJ investigation was greenlit. The ADA was watching. The Civil Rights Division was watching. And Karen was trapped in her own backyard, clinging to a clipboard while the foundations of her paper empire were set ablaze. And I was the one holding the match. It started with the knock. Not the kind of casual, neighborly tap-tap that Karen used to deliver her smug little notices, but a hard, hollow echo that shook the air. Federal. Serious. Measured. Karen opened her door to find 2 agents in navy suits holding leather folders embossed with the golden seal of the United States Department of Justice. No news vans. No neighbors. Just the law arriving not with sirens or spectacle but with finality. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Not yet. She just stared, confused, as if her delusions were finally being broken brick by brick. One of the agents spoke, "Ms. Karen Meyer, we are here to execute a federal subpoena regarding ADA violations, civil conspiracy, and willful negligence in your capacity as an acting HOA official. Please step aside." I watched it from across the street, sipping my coffee. No words. No gestures. Just one long, cold stare as her entire empire was walked out of her house in bankers' boxes. Emails. Meeting notes. Personal devices. Her clipboard wrapped in a plastic evidence bag. That one made me smile. The lawsuit had been filed and unsealed that morning. It was a 47-page legal warhead with Karen's name front and center, followed by the HOA board and individual accomplices as co-defendants. It included charges of targeted discrimination against a disabled minor, malicious interference with medical support, conspiracy to harass under the color of administrative authority, and violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act Title II and III. But that was just the civil side. The criminal referrals had already been forwarded to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And unlike local prosecutors who play golf with HOAs, the feds don't blink when kids are involved. The court date was set within days. A motion was granted for an expedited hearing due to ongoing risk of psychological harm and precedent value for national civil rights litigation. In plain English, the court wanted to make an example out of Karen. And I was more than happy to provide the map. I arrived at the federal courthouse in a charcoal suit with Liberty at my side, wearing her vest proudly, her scars still visible, her gait still a little slower, but her posture unwavering. Evan walked beside me holding her leash, his eyes serious and clear. There were reporters at the gate. I didn't stop. I wasn't here to grandstand. I was here to win. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Disability advocates, civil rights attorneys, former neighbors who had once ignored us now sat in the gallery, silent. The judge, a stone-faced woman with a long memory for precedent and no patience for pettiness, read the case file and nodded once. Then she turned to Karen's attorney. "Are you prepared to proceed?" His voice shook when he said yes. We began with a video. A clear, unbroken capture of Karen raising her taser, screaming, and striking Liberty while Evan clutched his head in the early stages of a seizure. The sound in the courtroom was suffocating silence. Then came the internal HOA messages. Printed. Verified. Sworn in. I read them aloud one by one. Karen's words. Brayer's dismissals. Judith's cruel jokes. I showed the room how they coordinated complaints. How they manufactured a fake threat. How they weaponized bylaws like claws and wrapped discrimination in the silk of community management. Karen tried to speak. She tried to cry. She told the judge she never meant to hurt anyone, that she feared for her safety, that she was just doing what she thought was right. But her face on the video told a different story. Her laughter. Her accusations. Her refusal to step down when warned. And the judge saw through it. This was not negligence, she said in her ruling. This was not a moment of panic. This was a premeditated campaign to drive out a child and his medical companion because they did not fit your manufactured version of neighborhood standards. And that, Ms. Meyer, is not only disgraceful, it is unlawful. The judgment came swiftly. Karen was found liable on all counts. The HOA was ordered dissolved by judicial decree. Every board member was banned from holding residential administrative positions for a minimum of 10 years. The court awarded financial damages to me and Evan totaling $2.7 million with an additional $800,000 in punitive damages against Karen personally. But the money wasn't the point. The message was. The judge referred the case to the DOJ for criminal prosecution. Karen would face a second courtroom, this time as a defendant in a federal criminal trial for felony interference with a medical device and aggravated animal cruelty. Outside, the cameras waited. I stood on the steps with Evan and Liberty and made my only public statement. This wasn't about a dog. This was about power abused, laws ignored, and a child targeted for daring to need help. My son's life matters. His service dog's life matters. And no clipboard dictator gets to change that. Then I walked away. But that wasn't the final move. Not yet. I had one more card to play. The following week, I purchased Karen's house. She tried to sue. Tried to block the foreclosure. But when the punitive damages hit and the HOA was dismantled, she lost her income stream, her protection, and her legal buffer all at once. Her house was auctioned in a closed settlement. I bought it anonymously through a shell LLC for a third of its market value. And I waited until she was gone. Not just evicted, gone. I didn't want to humiliate her further. I wanted her erased. Then I bulldozed it. Right to the foundation. Rented the excavator myself. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as the yellow metal jaws tore through the facade of what was once Karen's suburban throne. The porch. The walls. The windows where she used to spy on my son. All of it crushed into dust. I left the empty lot unbuilt for months, posted a sign on the chain-link fence. This space is now ADA compliant. And every time I walked Evan and Liberty past it, he smiled just a little more. The final act came in the form of federal reform. My case caught the attention of lawmakers, state and national. Petitions sprang up. I was asked to testify before a congressional committee on HOA overreach and ADA enforcement. I stood in front of a semicircle of senators and told them what happens when community associations go unchecked. We don't need more rules, I said. We need accountability. We need training. We need enforcement mechanisms for when petty tyrants wrap cruelty in administrative tape. A month later, the Liberty Act passed committee. A federal bill mandating HOA board training on ADA compliance, establishing a hotline for violations and granting DOJ faster authority to intervene. Named after my son's dog. Yeah? Now Evan goes to school without stairs. Liberty walks beside him, strong and scarred, a survivor. The neighborhood planted a new tree in the community park with a bronze plaque at its base. It reads, "In honor of Liberty, who stood when others failed and barked when silence would have killed." Every Halloween, kids wear little red vests over their costumes. Every Christmas, Liberty gets a stocking on the neighborhood gate. She earned that. And Karen? She's a cautionary tale now. A footnote in law school textbooks. A warning on HOA leadership forums. I don't think about her much. But sometimes, when I sip coffee on my porch and Liberty dozes at my feet, I wonder if she ever looks up from wherever she is and realizes that she didn't just lose a lawsuit. She lost control. Justice wasn't revenge. It was protection. And some of us were born to protect the ones you thought no one would fight for. I don't carry a badge anymore. But I carry the law. And the next time someone thinks about hurting a child because they're different, I hope they remember this case. I hope they remember Liberty.